Hey everybody, I'm Ashley Deer. I've been a software engineer at ClearEdge for a couple of years now. I work in a full stack role, so I touch a lot of front end and back end, and web accessibility is super important when you're designing any front end. So web accessibility is just accessibility for technology or web apps or websites. So accessibility is just like ease of use for everybody, people with disabilities or without. And so the estimated number of people with disabilities is 15% of all people, so that's a pretty big user base to keep track of. So the reason that you want to think about accessibility when you're making a website or a web app is that, number one, it's required by law for a lot of different things, so like government, or it's just good business. Like in a general sense, you want to cover every user possible, so having things be more accessible for more people is super important. So it benefits people with different types of disabilities, like visual disabilities, whether it's just low vision or completely blind, or auditory disabilities, so hard of hearing or completely deaf, motor disabilities, so whether they have poor motor skills or like shaky hands, things like that, cognitive disabilities, so learning disabilities, or things like ADHD, where they have a hard time focusing on things for a long period of time. And also people without disabilities, so things like if you're on a mobile device, or elderly people whose abilities change as they age, or things like temporary disabilities, like you've lost your glasses or you broke your arm so you physically can't use your mouse and keyboard anymore. And then also things like if you're in the bright sun and you can't see because the contrast is really low, or if you're someplace that doesn't have a fast internet connection, or if you're trying to just get through a really long form, so you're using your keyboard to just like smash through it really fast, that's something that's I do all the time. So some common mistakes that people make regarding accessibility is things like contrast. So you want to make sure that you can actually see your different colors for people who have like lower visibility or color blindness. And then keyboard inaccessibility. So if you can't get through every like active piece of your web app just without the mouse and without your mouse, then you can't use it if you're someone who's limited by like motor disabilities. And then messy resizing. So I think everybody's seen this if you've opened up your phone and a website hasn't been designed for this and you're like, oh God, I can't use this at all. The same thing happens for people who are trying to increase the font size and they can't see very well. And then having bad alt text on things like images. A really common thing is just like writing, well, this is a picture, and that's not helpful for something that's like screen reading. So you want to add something that actually adds like context. And if your image doesn't add any context, then you probably just don't want to bother with alt text at all. So something like a little design. And when all of this comes together, you're like, oh God, a forest fire. I have no usability because all my things are bad. And so you want to be able to fix that, and you're like, well, when do I fix that? And so you can fix that when you start. So while you're in your design phase, you can think about different frameworks and technologies that will do it for you. Or just keeping track of things as you go and build things. So you're trying to design a form, and you want to keep in mind that you can make it keyboard accessible as you go through, which saves you a ton of time later. And you're like, oh no, I've never done that, and I have a finished web app. But you can actually fix it at any time, and it's probably easier than you think, just by keeping track of some small things that are really quick to fix. And I'll go through some of those quick fixes. So not relying on color by itself. If you have two different like buttons or icons, and you're like, oh, red and green, that means good and bad. Someone with red-green color blindness can't tell the difference at all. So you always want to make sure you have a label and an icon. So even if someone doesn't speak the language, they can tell what the button's for. And things like media with videos and sound are becoming more and more available on all kinds of web apps. So you want to add things like captions. And what's really awesome is that there are a lot of technologies that will do that for you. And then keyboard accessibility we come back to because it's really common. So making sure that you can just go through your entire website from the keyboard. Throw away your mouse for the day. And then use something that is going to tell you like what buttons to use. Because if someone's going through a form and they think they can arrow key through it because they can arrow key through everything else, they can't. It's out the window. And then something else that everyone has faced is a menu that you're trying to go through and it keeps closing because you keep leaving it. So making sure that you have a huge hover and timeout length that you can actually use the menu is really helpful for everybody. And another quick thing is the focus. So I think when you're using like your keyboard, it tells you where you are. And a lot of designers will just get rid of it because it doesn't match their theme. Don't get rid of it. That's the quickest fix. And then if you do want to keep it and you're like, it's ugly, you can make it a different color. Key takeaways, anyone who's working on a web app is responsible for accessibility. So if you're a product owner, you're an SE, anything. So only you can prevent web inaccessibility.